Okay, so our presentation is over the independent versus the dependent variable.
So this is a table of content. So Elise will be doing the independent variables. I will be doing the dependent variables. Patricia is doing the characteristics and differences, and then me will be doing examples.
Okay, so when we're talking about the independent variable, we want to know what is it. So an independent variable, also known as IV, is one that stands alone. So this can be manipulated. This variable is not changed by the other variables that you are trying to measure. So when evaluating for a relationship between variables, you are trying to determine if the independent variable has a result on a change in the dependent variable.
So now I have the dependent variable. So what is it? So a dependent variable, also known as DV, depends on other variables. It's the variable that's being tested in the experiment. It's the variable that you observe slash analyze. You examine changes in the DV in response to changes in the IV. So you ask yourself the question, what is the response being observed? And this will help you identify the DV. And is usually denoted by Y.
So these are the characteristics of the independent variable. So the independent variable, also known as IV, it should be manipulative, which just means that you can control the variable and change the condition of it based on like what your research method or your scientific study is about. So you can ask the question of what variable is being intentionally manipulated to identify that IV. It should be exogeneity, which just means that there should be no other variables that influence that independent variable. So your X shouldn't be dependent on anything that's on the Y. So there should only have one condition that changes, and that's it. And it also should be variability, which just means that the IV should have a different value and can be assigned compared to the other variables. Characteristics of the dependent variables, so the outcome. So the dependent variable should have a definite outcome or result as from the independent variable. Same thing with response is kind of similar. So the dependent variable should change or respond due to the manipulation of the IV. So you can ask, what's changed? What's the response? What's the outcome essentially? And it should be measurable. So you should be able to measure the quantity or the quality of your results of the dependent variable. So you may be asking, how can I tell the difference between an independent versus a dependent variable? Well, you can ask these questions to help you identify the IV versus the DV. So you can ask the question of, does the variable 1 cause change in the variable 2? And it cannot be possible for variable 2 to cause any change in the variable 1. So variable 1 should be the independent variable and variable 2 should be the dependent variable. So an example is, what is the effect of fast food on blood pressure? So we can ask these questions and fill those in with the variables. So we can ask, does fast food cause change in blood pressure? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But if we reverse that, does blood pressure cause change in fast food? Not so much. We can also ask the question, it's not possible for blood pressure to cause any change in fast food. So then we should be able to identify, okay, IV is the fast food and dependent variable is the blood pressure.
All right. After understanding the differences of IV and DV with Patricia, now you're going to do some examples with me. So I have a research questions here. Does exposure to classical music have an impact on our test scores? So in order to answer this question, I'm going to design a research where I define a big group of students into two smaller groups. Group A will be listening to classical music for an hour every day for 2 months, and Group B will not be listening to classical music at all. After 2 months, the students will be given a test to see which group will perform better. So for this example, I have the dependent variable, which is the test scores, and my independent variable here is whether the student was exposed or not to classical music. All right, so let's do some more examples here. So I have the research questions of, is medical marijuana effective for pain reduction in people with chronic pain? So the IV here I want to use is the use of medical marijuana. and I want to see if it has any effect on the dependent variable, which is the pain. The second question is, what is the effect of intermittent fasting on blood sugar levels? So I want to study whether the independent variable, which is intermittent fasting, has any effect on the dependent variable, which is the blood sugar level. For the third research question, this is also our article review, which is A3 method effective in mitigating the volume of traffic in the ORs? So for this one, I want to see the use of A3 method, which is the independent variable, whether it has any effect on the dependent variable, which is the volume of traffic in the ORs. So do you think that this is simple? I know that you all had it right, but now let's look at some situation where it is not as simple to identify between IV and DV. So I have four situations here. The first one is bidirectional causality. So for this one, this is the situation where the change in one variable can influence the other. My example is the relationship between income and education. So as you know, high income can lead to increased access to education, but at the same time, high education may lead to better job, which is better income. So for this one, we don't know which influences which is going to be challenging for us to identify between IV and DV. The second situation is the simultaneous causality. This is kind of like similar to the first one, but for this one, the two variables influence each other kind of at the same time. The example I have here is the relationship between crime rates and police presence. So an increase in crime rates may lead to an increase in police presence, but at the same time, an increase in police presence may deter crime. So it's going to be difficult to determine which will have the influence on the other one. The third situation here is confounding variables. These are additional factors that can influence the observed relationship between IV and DV. So, for example, the study of the impact of a new teaching method on student performance. So, we have other factors such as student motivation, social economic status, or prior knowledge. These factors can confound the relationship between the new teaching method and the student performance. So it's going to be, again, difficult for us to understand whether the teaching method here really has the effect on the student performance. The last one I have is the longitudinal studies. These are studies that their data is collected over an extended period of time. And the example is the study of the effect of smoking on lung function over time. So at the beginning, the smoking status could be the IV because it has the impacts on the lung function. But over time, when lung function is deteriorated enough, it will prevent people from smoking and become the independent variable. So these are four situations when the task of identifying IV and DV is not straightforward. And this is also the end of our presentation. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions or discussion, leave us a comment below. Thank you.